Welcome CSE 121 W1 to exercise 26, which is beginning to work with Tkinter, which is a GUI that you can use with Python. And by a GUI, that means a graphical user interface, similar to the turtle module that we worked with, except we could do more with it. We don't just have turtles running around. We can actually have forms and take data. And let me just show you an example of an older one. Now this is in the newer browser because I'm re-recording this for spring 2023. The last time I used it was maybe 4 years ago, and it was still a little glitchy because it was new to Replit, but Replit has made a lot of changes since then, and it works okay depending on the time of day. I know that Replit can get very busy during certain times of day because of a lot of people using it at the same time, but I have my sidebar kind of closed up here so I have more room. This is the GUI area. There's still a console down here where you'll see errors when they come up, but just to give you an example of what's happening here, it'll show you a little window. Now this is a window that can move around. It's an actual GUI window. Now you can move it in here, so it's being emulated in Replit, but this is what the window looks like. And you can make it different sizes, different background colors, so you could kind of, that's what a GUI is, it's an interface. So right now, this is something very simple. We have a red label, a green label, and a blue label, RGB. And then we have buttons, button 1, button 2, button 3, and a reset button in here. And what's going to happen is when you hit button 1, it's going to darken the red. There. Button 2 is going to darken the green. And button 3 is going to darken the blue. Very simple. So we're starting very simple here. We're not going through a lot of data and doing all kinds of math. And then reset puts it back. That's all you're going to do for this exercise. And then we'll work with some more data after that. But just a very simple interface here. And it kind of works like HTML when you set this up. They have different ways to do it. They have a pack geometry, which kind of just puts everything in blocks, and then you can kind of float things side to side. Or what I ended up using here, and I think that's probably the best way to go for what we're doing, is to set up something called a grid. And a grid is like a table. And if you think of a table, think of it like this is the first row, second row, third row, fourth row, fifth row, and they actually start with 0. So when you specify rows, they start with 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So all these are on row 0. This is on row 1, row 2, row 3, and row 4. And then columns, column 0, column 1, column 2. So there's 3 columns and there's 5 rows. So it's a table. And these are all in the first row. These are all on their own separate row in one single column. So that's the way we're going to set it up because it kind of works out easier that way, I think, especially when you start to get more complicated. But anyway, that's all we're going to do first is work with something like this. So we're going to work with this GUI. So we work with these widgets. So far, the widgets that we'll be working with in the beginning will be our main window, which we'll call root. Sometimes it'll be called M. You'll see it called different things, but maybe I'll call it root because I think that's what's recommended. But in different resources, you'll see it called different things. So this will be our window, and then we'll have a label. These are labels, and they'll have text on them. You could give them background color. You could give them foreground color, which is white. Reconnecting here. There we go. Reconnected here. I'm not sure if that was me or if that was Replit. But anyway, that's what we're going to be doing. So working on this, and then we'll get into something a little more detailed. And, you know, this is our code over here, and it's kind of like HTML code, kind of like the turtle code. If you remember in Intro to Computing doing the stop sign and stuff like that with turtle, where we tried to do a little bit more. So it's kind of like that. So it gives us an opportunity to work with a GUI just a little bit more with Python. And also, I just want to show you some resources before we get started. If you go to Documents and Resources and go to Bookmarks, and I didn't put this by unit, I just have it down in the bottom with Python resources. There's the turtle module resources, but we have Introduction to Tkinter, and this one's pretty good. This is just a website, but if you go through this and just kind of look at it a little bit and check it out, you can kind of see what's going on here. It gives you an introduction. This is a command line, this is GUI, and so on. And it talks about Tkinter a little bit, talks about the different widgets. Again, label, button, we can have entry fields, we can have frames, we can have radio buttons, kind of like a form and a canvas that you can put graphics on. There's geometry configuration where you could do pack, grid, and place. We're going to use grid because I think that's easiest because it's like a table. I'm just going to jump right into that. So anyway, that's one resource, the FBot one, and then there's also Geeks for Geeks. I find this one's okay. It's just a little less readable. It's pretty much the same thing that you're seeing on FBot. It may show things a little bit different. Sometimes instead of root, they'll use a W for window. Sometimes they'll use M for master. And that's the Geeks for Geeks one. There's also another video if you want to watch another video. This Derek Banis, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but he has 1.23 million subscribers, so he knows what he's doing if he has that many subscribers. I barely have 1,000. He has 1 million, so he does this full time, I'm assuming. But he has a pretty nice Tkinter tutorial. He goes through fast, but that's good. So if you don't want to be wasting a lot of time, another one to go through. These are a whole series of videos. This guy, he says Python. He calls it Python, but he has a whole playlist of anything with Tkinter. And again, Tkinter is not something you're going to use a whole lot, so I don't use it as something to invest a lot of time into, especially if you're going on to programming too. You'll be working with Java and things like that, so Tkinter won't help you a whole lot, but it will get you used to working with methods and classes and also working with a GUI. So this guy's good too if you need to look at anything else and anything else you want to check out. So those are the resources that you can look at here, and again, we'll get started. So let's just look at the code for a little bit here before we get started. We do have to import all. This is from Tkinter import all, and then we're going to make a root window of the TK class. So it'll be a capital TK like that, and then we could put a title on it because this thing did have a title on it. Up at the top it says color labels, that's all it is, and we can use some different methods like config to change colors. We're going to set up labels, and we'll use these variable or instance names. I'm not sure if they call them instances or if they call them variables. I'll double check the information in the websites, but whatever we call them, they're like variables, so we'll use them as those. So we'll set up variables because it'll break things out a little bit. Instead of putting dot after everything, we'll set up our labels, we'll set up our buttons, and then in the end, you kind of pack everything together. Now, I have some pack stuff commented out because I did the pack method, then I changed it to a grid method. So we're going to use the grid method. And then at the very end, you have something called main loop, which actually runs it. That's always typically at the end of your code. So that's what we're going to do, and we'll start from scratch with a brand new Repel, and we'll have to choose the Tkinter, the Python Tkinter when we do that. So that'll be coming up in just a second once I log out of here and log into a different account. Okay, I'm back in my account that I use for student things that I work on and when I record videos. I'm going to create a new Repel, and it's going to be Python TK. Let's see if we could find TK. Oh, it's just called Tkinter. Sorry about that. I went to an older one. It's just called Tkinter. It's not Python. Tkinter, but it does have the Python thing there. So it's Tkinter, not Python like the turtle one. So make sure you choose Tkinter. And I think in the past it said Python Tkinter, like the turtles. And then you're going to call it 26 and just call it color labels because that's all we're doing on this one. And you could put your initials. I'll put RH here. And that's it. So Tkinter is your Repel template you're working in. You'll call it 26 color labels, and let's go. And again, you'll have a console down here, and you'll also have your GUI area. If Ghostwriter is up here, you could just close out of that. And then just run it again. It should set up your interface with the two windows. With the output. So in case you ever lose it, it's the output window and it's the console down here. And actually, oh, this is interesting. It has some kind of basic code for you to get started from the last time I used it. So it has some things to start here. So you could use some of this. It has import Tkinter as TK. So it's gonna, let's see, it's calling this window. Let's just wipe out this for now. Not that it's not worth looking at. Let's go from Tkinter, and it's all lowercase, import, and then all is going to be that. And let's just make sure we have it right. I have the FBOT up on here. From Tkinter lowercase, import all with the asterisk. And then you could do window. Sometimes they call it root. I'm going to call it root because that's what I've seen in other places. So I'm going to call it root. This guy uses root, so I'm going to use root. So let's use root. And we'll put root equals TK, it's a capital T, and it'll have the parentheses. And then we want to use a title at the top, and we want to have main loop at the bottom. So let's work with that first. We'll use root.title, and whatever you want to call it. I'll call it color labels. I'll put it as a string, and then we'll do root dot main loop. So that's what will finish it off. And don't put toot, put root. So this will go down here. I'll put some spaces here. So this is how it'll start, or at least how we're going to do it. And let's just stop the other one and run it again. And there's our title up there. And what I'll do is I'll move this down. I'll move this over a little bit. I'll close this up because we'll just be working in the main PY. And that's pretty good right now. This will be just for errors down here. And what we'll do is we'll start putting some color labels on here. And we'll have to use the label widgets. So you'll see labels are some widgets that we'll use down here. And you could give them names for the labels, for the color labels that we use. So we'll give them some names. And I'll look at this here just as a little cheat sheet. We're going to give a variable name for our label, because the label is the first widget we'll use. So let's make a label. And we'll go here. I'll just call it lab1. Or we could call it lab R for red, green, and blue. Let's go lab R, that's red. We'll call that lab red, and we'll put equal. And you don't always have to have spaces in here, but we'll make it a label. Now these have to have capital letters. So we'll use label. You can see it's showing there, master. And I'll click on label, and then in parentheses we're going to put the master. The master is root, so we're going to put root. So we have to put that because that means it's part of that. So it's being configured from the root window. So that's kind of like a child of it. So then we could put some other things in here. We can give it a background color. We can give it text. Let's put text equals, and then it's a string, and we'll just call it red because it's a red label. And in between these we put commas, and we can use BG color or just BG. And let's check here. FG and BG they use, and you could use color names, you can use hex, you can put width here, and you could even put a font. And I think you have to put when we get into the font, you have to put none. I think you have to have a font here, but we'll see. But we'll start just with background color equals, and it'll be red. So background color will be red, and foreground we'll make it white because it'll be easy to see. And these should be strings. And you can see it'll wrap here, so that's good. And we can put things like size. Let's put like 30 pixels for a size. Now I think that goes in the font area, and we'll create a font area with different things in parentheses here that'll be kind of separate. Now if you notice this area, font, everything for font goes in parentheses, so they just have a font name and they have a size. And I think you can also put like bold or something in there, so everything will go in there. So let's see if it works without font and just see what it does. And then we may have to put a font property in there. Again, I haven't done this for a while, so let's just see what happens first. Now, we also have to pack things, so we didn't pack this yet. So eventually we'll use grid. So I'll put lab R, and I'll do dot pack. I think that's all I should need right now. Let's just see what happens. And it's really small, so we might want to make that bigger, but that's it. That's our window right there. So it's actually working, but we'll set it up with a grid, and then we'll also make it a little bit larger. So let's make this label a little bit larger, and what we could do is just go right here and put a comma, and I'll do font, and I think that just uses parentheses. Let's check. Oh, font equals and then parentheses. So font equals and then your information that you want in there, and the information we want in there, we don't have to put a font. I think we can just put none. If we don't want to choose a typeface, we could just put none. And then I think we could put like, let me put 30. I think that's what I used on the other one. You could put 30 for the size. So I think that'll work as a size for that. And notice that you do have parentheses inside the overall label parentheses. So let's just stop this and run it and see what we got going on here. And that's a little bit bigger, so that's okay. And you could pack these side by side. They actually do something like floating, but what we'll do is we'll actually make a grid. So instead of doing pack, we'll do grid. We'll have to put in like rows and columns. So I'll put in here grid, and let's do a couple first because let's do 3 here. So we got lab R. Let me copy that, and I'll paste it, and I'll do lab RGB. So we'll do G next, and this will be green, and the background color will be green, and I'll paste it again, and this time we'll do lab B for, get it, RGB. Now we have lab B. You could use an underscore if you want, if that works easier, but I'll just throw them all together. And this one will be blue, and the background color will be blue, and let's see what happens. Now right now we're only using this, so if we do something, it's probably not really going to work. We're only seeing red because that's the only thing that's showing up. So let's grid all of these. And right now, in terms of our table, we're only going to have 1 row. So we're going to say row equals 0, comma, and I'll put row equals 0 because it's the first row. So that would be 0. And row equals 0. And then I'll do column, and you have to spell out column. Column equals 0 because this would be the first one. Then we'll have column equals 1. And then column equals 2. Paste it again, column equals 2. So remember, this is column 1, 2, 3, but it's really 0, 1, 2. And it's all in the first row. So these have to change too. So make sure you change your variable names here, or your instance names, to G and to B, or you will get an error. And let's see what happens. And there we go. And we can actually increase the width of these too. If you want these widths different, you can actually put in different character amounts, because right now they're as wide as the labels that are here. So you could make them a little bit larger. They actually use character amounts. Let's see how we would do that. Before font, I'll throw in, I guess I could throw it after font. I'll put a comma, I'll put width, and I'll just put equals 8. Let me just see what happens here. And I'll just stop it, run it again, and that made it a little wider, and that looks pretty good. I'll do them all 8 like that, and they should center in there, I believe. So let me just copy this width equals 8 at the end here, and with the comma, and I'll put it after the font on each one. So now they all have a width of 8. I'll stop it, run it, and that's pretty much what I want. And if you want it less, try 7. There we go. So that's our first row. So again, we have row 0, which is the first row, and then we have red in column 0, green in column 1, and blue in column 2. And what we're going to do is make a couple rows of buttons, and you could call it R. I called it button 1, button 2. You could call it R button, green button, blue button, whatever you want. And what we're going to do then is then use some Python to change those. So let's take a break here, and then we'll do our buttons next time, because that won't take too long now that we know what we're doing here, and after I gave you the introduction here. So again, make sure you have the import name up here, and we're calling it root equals TK, so we're using root all through here. And you don't have to, but we're giving variable names to the labels that we're using so that we could identify them when we lay them out. So this is kind of creating them, and this is kind of almost printing them in a sense on the grid. So we're doing this in a grid in a table format here. So we're going to do the same thing with buttons, but they'll just be in separate rows. So each button will be in like row 1, 2, 3, 4 as we go down. Come back for part 2 of this exciting color label changing exercise that we're working on using Tkinter. And again, I'm just starting slow just so you understand all this kind of stuff, because it's a little more primitive that we're working here. But again, you do have to specify root, and then sometimes you're going to have other elements inside of elements. So you may have something inside of root, you may have something inside of something else that's inside of root. So we'll come back for part 2.